Welcome to Calaveras.Farm. My name is Susan Tomasich, and today I have with me Zach Drivon. He is an attorney at law, and he is an expert in the area of commercial cannabis. Welcome, Zach.
Thanks for having me, Susan.
You are welcome. So do you want to talk a little bit about your background, and then we can get into the details of commercial cannabis?
Sure. Well, born and raised in Stockton, California, just over the hill. I went to Sonoma State University and studied political science. Took a year off at a grocery store job and decided to go to law school. In 2009, I attended the Lawrence Drivon School of Law in Stockton, California, kind of a legacy school. My father went there, grandfather, a couple of cousins, couple of uncles. You kind of can't throw a stick around Stockton without hitting a Drivon attorney, at least historically. Graduated in 2013. I went into criminal defense, practicing out of an office in Modesto, California. Really fell in love with that, defending people's rights and kind of sticking up for the underdog. From childhood, as it relates to cannabis, I've always had an affinity for the culture. I don't think it's any big secret. Some friends of mine growing up, were in the trade on a, very modest scale. And then once we got out of high school, some of them went off to start their own cannabis collectives and farms. And so in 2016, when regulations came out from the state that were proposing to allow cannabis businesses to operate as, commercial ventures, started doing research around it, started having conversations with some of these friends of mine and others that I'd met through practice about what their plans were to transition into the regulated space. One thing led to another, and got started doing policy reform advocacy in Stockton. And the rest is history. I could sit here and, it'd take us 10 hours to tell the whole legacy journey to get us to here, but it has been quite a journey. And so that's the quick background on how I got to be a cannabis attorney.
All right. Were you practicing in cannabis in 2016 up here when we had the urgency ordinance?
I wasn't directly active in advocating for the urgency ordinance. I was aware of it. Some of the operators up here that were very, very much involved were part of the group that were having these conversations. We focused on policy reform in the Valley at that point in time, but I was aware of the registration process and the efforts by some of the more prominent operators to get regs on the books and carve a path out here for growers. So, yeah, I was aware of it, but I can't lay any claim to having been very active at that point in time.
Okay. So you pretty much came up here when we got the permanent ordinance
Correct.
Installed and
when it was time to get rights to apply and start putting permit applications in, by that time, we had gotten, probably around 10 or 12 projects approved in the Valley, and had clients that I represented out there with retail operations that wanted to get farms going up here. And so that's how I started out, was getting a few farms permitted around like 2018, 2019. Since that time, with every project, this is how my practice has progressed. With every project that we get approved in any given jurisdiction, word kind of spreads, and we picked up a lot more business since then. I think at this point of time, we've probably done 8 or 10 different projects, inclusive of 15, 16 local permits, and a bunch more state licenses behind those. So we're still active. We have about 5 or 6 clients that we currently represent here now with regulatory compliance, general legal counsel. The way that our practice operates is we focus on getting you the licenses, helping you develop the projects, and then once the projects are up and running, serving as your general counsel and maintaining regulatory compliance with a full suite of administrative support for anything and everything having to do with local permits and state licenses. That's our focus.
Okay. And up here in Calaveras County, what type of licenses do we have available to us?
The vast majority you're going to see is cultivation licenses.
Okay.
Outdoor cultivation specifically. It's one of the few local jurisdictions that authorizes outdoor cultivation. And beyond that, if your property meets the criteria for a ministerial permit, the difference between a ministerial permit and, say, a conditional use permit is if your project meets all of the base criteria under the ordinance with a ministerial permit, it's not up to the discretion of a governing body like the Board of Supervisors to decide whether or not you get a permit. If you can check the boxes and meet the criteria, then you're going to get a permit. That's in ag areas for the most part for cultivation. We also in Calaveras, I say we generally, allow indoor cultivation in industrial areas, distribution and manufacturing. And while there are a few retail facilities in Calaveras County, that's not one of the licenses that you see predominate here. It's mostly cannabis cultivation.
Okay. And during your time here, what have you found to be the biggest pitfall for someone who wants to start a cannabis business?
I think poor planning more than anything, undercapitalization, getting into a project with just enough resources to get started, and in certain circumstances, not having the capital that's necessary to get you to that first harvest. A lot of times we see, not a lot of times, I'd say once or twice we've taken on clients that had commitments from capital partners or investors, and were able to get their permits going and maybe get their farms up and running, but for instance didn't have the resources necessary to pay their laborers to get them through harvest, or didn't have the capital necessary for some critical piece of equipment, or what have you. It's like a failure to launch for lack of that ramp that you need to really see your first harvest and have a little contingency in your back pocket for the just in case situations. That's probably the biggest pitfall. We try and get ahead of all that. When we sit down with our clients, we'll do a consultation and talk to them about, what all the requirements are as far as the financial responsibilities, permit fees, water board fees, state license fees. We take a look at your lease obligations if you're purchasing a property, what the cost of that is going to look like from start to finish. If you're getting, environmental resources studies, any mitigation measures that's going to require potentially earthwork, grading, construction. We help kind of connect the dots for our clients to articulate what that plan is going to look like, so you have a solid idea of what it's going to take to be successful before you go ahead and dive in. So I think, a pound of planning up front is worth, a ton of execution at the back end. So
Okay. Now, a lot of people up here were farming in 2016 with the urgency ordinance. Before that, they were farming under the medical cannabis structure. And I think at that time, like friends would get together and they'd form a business and they'd do their LLC or whatever they were going to, however structured they wanted their business to be. And that worked fine for then. But now, in the new climate that we're in, the new business climate that we're in, there's a lot more stresses, I think. The taxes is one. Having to
Definitely.
pay tax whether you sell a pound of pot or not, you're still obligated for the county tax here. I think it's much more important to get someone like yourself involved in the nitty-gritty. So what happens if I farm with you for 3 years and at the end of the third year I just hate your guts and I cannot stand being around you anymore? Now what do we do?
yeah, that's a good question. It's somewhat of an open question. I think, again, it comes down to planning and having proper documentation and contractual agreements between partners before money is spent, and certainly before money starts coming through the door. That's what complicates things more often than not, is when money gets tight and you have to reach back into your pocket to keep the business going. Where's that going to come from, right? And so, if you have a company that you're forming for the specific purpose of having a cannabis business as a startup, those things need to be spelled out in plain words. Okay, you're going to be a 50% owner. How much are you contributing for that 50%? Okay, in the event of an additional capital raise or a cash call to bring more money through the door before we start generating revenue, whose obligation is that going to be? And so that's where, having shareholder agreements for corporations or operating agreements between the members of an LLC that are getting into this is extremely important, to your point. That way, these questions come up down the line after you're already in it. We say, here, look, this is our agreement. This is what it says. This is what we have to go by. We both signed this, and this is the Bible as far as the obligations that we both have to see this through. When it hits the fan, you start talking about either dissolving the company or selling the membership interest or the shares of one partner or another, if the person wants out, or you start talking about, diluting your equity in the company to raise more capital and bring in additional partners. These are all things that, should be spelled out in writing and agreed to between partners before they start a business.
Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Class 4 license, and I believe that includes self-distribution.
Okay.
Is that correct?
Self-distribution, yeah, that is an option for cultivators here.
Okay.
That would allow an operator to transport their own product. There's a bit of a caveat there. I think it's a little ironic. In order to get a self-distribution license from the county, you need to apply for a Type 11 license from the state, which it's not a self-distribution license. It's actually just a general distribution license that you're going to get. So we talk about policy reform stuff. I think that's a little cleanup that we could look to in the future. But effectively, in order to legally transport product, you have to have a state license and you have to have a local authorization to engage in that activity. So the self-distribution, where you can't get a traditional third-party distribution license on an ag property, where you'd be cultivating here in the county, you can get a self-distribution license so long as you have a cultivation license that it can attach to.
Okay.
So it gives the growers a little more latitude to be able to move product on their own.
Okay, so if I had one, let's say I could possibly do pre-rolls, put them in my own packaging, and then instead of having to take them to yet another distributor who would then go to a retailer, I can take my product and go straight to a retailer. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't, operational concerns, I don't want to really speak to those per se. I will
Okay.
say, under a Type 11 state license, you can package, transport, you can call a lab to come test your product. You can deliver product to other distributors, other retailers. You can do pre-rolls. You cannot do infused pre-rolls.
Okay.
Non-infused pre-rolls only. Those are all things that you can do under a Type 11 license. What you can do on your ag property, it depends on the nature of the facilities and the occupancy that you have in addition to the local permits that you're holding. So I don't want to make a blanket statement and get, someone who's watching in trouble.
Okay.
Those are case-by-case basis. A lot of what we do is we take a look at state regs, we take a look at local regs, we take a look at, an operator's specific type of functions and what they have going on, and we do an assessment for them of, the do's and don'ts, and, plan to make accommodations for additional activities that they want to engage in, and tell them, what not to do in order to keep them out of trouble and help them be successful. So, it's not plug and play. One size doesn't necessarily fit all. So I want to be careful about, the things that are represented as far as what you can and can't do.
Sure, that
it's
makes
really
sense.
case-by-case basis.
Yeah. So what are the common, I was going to say pitfalls, we may have already talked about that, but here in the county, in the people that you've worked with, what has been the most common thing that's brought them down? I mean, I've heard that permits are being pulled because they can't pay taxes. People can't pay their taxes.
Sure. Yeah, we've seen that. That comes back to financial resources. I think, the backdrop to all this is since 2021, we've seen like a 60+% decline in the cannabis market statewide. And so where growers early on were able to get, between $800 to $1,000 a pound, this season we're seeing $250 a pound. We're seeing operators that are having to do fire sales on bulk product at $1.50 a pound,
Right.
just to bring money through the door and keep the show on the road, so to speak. But yeah, certainly, taxes have been an issue. We've got a 60% reduction last 3 years. That has helped. Operationally, I think having facilities to dry and cure your product once it's harvested That's been a huge problem, and there's a demand for drying, curing, and storage space. I think in this jurisdiction specifically, and I think statewide, at least in Northern California, there's a need for that. You're seeing growers who've been able to have a great yield, have a great harvest, but don't have the space, the conditioned space to be able to see that product through and dry it and cure it properly so that it's marketable and so that you can fetch the highest price possible. Ways to mitigate that and save on labor costs is if you're able to sell your product fresh, frozen, right off the stock. We've seen a lot of operators do that, especially early on during harvest. To the extent that operators can afford to dry and cure product and hold on to it a little bit deeper into the year and into early next year and maybe see prices go up. That's another approach that operators can take. But yeah, that's pretty common is, to get all the way to the 5-yard line with harvest. And then literally, we were out at a facility last week where, there's an acre and a half of cannabis still sitting out in the freezing cold, wet air. And so it's a shame to see, but it does happen. Again, comes back to planning, right?
Right.
And without naming operators or whatever, in this case, you had someone that bought probably twice as many clones as they had last year. Like they didn't build twice as many buildings. And so you say it's a good problem to have, but as far as having, a ton of weed to sell, but if you can't bring it home and you can't bring it to a state where it's going to make sense and be worthwhile to grow and harvest, you could have helped yourself out up front by having a better plan in place.
Is there an opportunity in Calaveras County for someone to have a drying facility that they can rent out to other farmers, or is that against our regulations?
Well, I believe the answer generally is yes. Rent out is kind of a tricky way of putting it. There are processor licenses available at the state level. It's a subset of the cultivation license. And what a processor license allows is for an operator to take in harvested product from third parties, dry it, cure it. They could offer that as a service, or they could purchase that product from the open market, dry it, cure it, and then resell it. The terms of that, business arrangement between grower and processor is really just contractual. But yeah, I think that's an opportunity that's out here, and I know of a couple operators specifically that have constructed facilities, for that purpose, in addition to having the facilities to dry their own product. But yeah, that is a possibility. We've explored that with some of the county officials. There's a way to get it done. The distributor license plays into that. The self-distribution license is, as you noted, for a facility that would happen to be in an ag zone. But yeah, I think there's a need for it.
I do too, and my question is then the transportation. So the self-distributor can transport their product legally. If I don't have a self-distribution license and I want to come to your facility and let's say use your service, you're going to dry and cure for me. How do I get it from my farm to the drying facility legally?
You have to contract with a distributor, whether it's the processor that has a distributor license as part of his operations and he or she is going to come pick that up and bring it back to their facility, or you contract with a third-party distributor to come pick that product up and take it to the processing facility. It's mandated by state law that a distributor is the one that transports that product anywhere it goes, out other than within
your own property.
Facility.
Sure. How about testing? Are people coming up here to test, or are we having to send things down to the valley or somewhere else to get testing done?
Yeah, I'm not aware of a lab testing facility here in Calaveras County. In fact, I think there's very few in the valley generally. Most of them are in the Bay Area, down in Southern California. And so what you'll see happen is you'll have a distributor that picks up from a farm, takes the product back to their distribution facility, and from there, they'll have the lab come out, pull samples from their inventory, take the samples back to the lab, get them tested, and then the results come back, and if you get a passing certificate of analysis, a COA, then that product is free to be distributed on down the line.
Okay.
So that's how it works.
Sure. And are you familiar with the kind of the legalities of the lab? I was told, and I have not looked this up, that you can't have a lab that both tests cannabis and then is used for other things. That just seems a little weird to me, but this industry has some interesting caveats to it.
I am not certain that there is a prohibition on a cannabis testing lab on testing other agricultural products or other substances. I've not heard that. Then again, we haven't represented any labs in the 8 years that we've been around. I'm unaware of any prohibition on labs testing other products, but there have been a lot of controversies around the testing labs over the last few years as far as fixing results or paying for your THC percentage and things like that. But no, I wasn't aware of that prohibition.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, I think in any business you're going to find some people that are trying to bend the rules to, make it easier, which we don't promote that here.
I can't disagree with you there. That's true.
Yeah. So if you were going to make one change to the Calaveras County Cannabis Code that would benefit the farmers the most, what do you think it would be?
Oh boy. Well, I don't want to get in trouble with the county or the tax base, but it would help the growers if we had a lower tax rate. I think, by and large, a lower tax rate would be huge. We've gotten the 60% reduction. That helps. But when you're talking about supporting an industry that is a very significant tax base here, I think the board has done what they can. I think the board is under pressure to hold cannabis businesses accountable.
Sure.
And but I also think that there's a perception amongst some members of the general public that somehow the cannabis growers are getting over on the county, not following the rules, making money hand over fist and keeping it all to themselves, which couldn't be further from the truth. The truth of it is most of these farms are family owned. People are supporting workers. They're paying a wage that far exceeds the minimum wage that someone would earn, say at like a McDonald's. Mm-hmm. And they have a ton of overhead that traditional businesses don't have to deal with. IRS Code 280E significantly restricts the amount of tax deductions that a cannabis business can take. You've got, local taxes on top of state taxes, on top of federal taxes, without the benefit of these deductions. The cost of regulatory compliance is significant. And so it's hard. It's a tough business to be in. And, I think if I could pick one thing, I would say, get rid of the tax. But I know that's a pipe dream, not necessarily a likely scenario. So
That's okay. We can dream.
yeah, we got the badges going away in January, so that's definitely a win for the operators.
Absolutely. And a win for the county, too, because we were actually spending money
Agreed.
to keep that program implemented.
And that was very surprising to see. And I think, again, kudos to the Board of Supervisors for making that policy decision that's going to benefit both sides. I think when you have an open dialogue and a governing body that's receptive, not only to the needs of the community at large and looking to protect the public health and welfare, but also to protect the businesses. The businesses are the ones that are giving the employment, they're generating the tax revenue. And they've stepped forward in full transparency since the registration process, began in 2016 to be regulated, to be in the light, to not have to look over their shoulder and move in the underground. So I think we're getting there. It's been slow progress. There's been bumps in the road for sure, but we continue working together and keeping an open dialogue, and I think we can be successful.
I think so. Is there a payment plan if I can't get my taxes paid on time? I have a payment plan if I can't pay my real estate. I have a payment plan if I can't pay my income taxes.
No.
But none. So in my opinion, that would be a really good step for the county to take. I had this discussion with somebody and they go, well, it's not a property tax. Like there's no hard thing there that you're taxing. But then I started thinking about it and went, yeah, but my income taxes, I can get a payment plan on that. And
Yeah.
there's nothing they can take away from me other than my life, my house, and my,
Yeah.
but
Unfortunately, Calaveras County is not unique as far as local jurisdictions, as far as the rigidity around the money that comes through the door. There should be a payment plan. And I think, when we're talking about abandon the tax and where we're at now, that sounds like a pretty decent compromise. So maybe that's something that's coming down the pipe in 2025. I can get behind that for sure.
all right. Okay, let's talk a little bit about our planning commission here in Calaveras County. We have an amazing planning commission, in my opinion. They're very detail oriented. What advice would you give to somebody that had to go before the planning commission for either an appeal or an AUP? Well, an AUP or CUP for a CUP.
Sure. Do your homework. Know your project top to bottom. Go out and talk to your neighbors. Talk to the people that may have concerns about your project. Talk to the people that may oppose your project. Even if you can't win them over and get them to support your project, at least you're going to have an idea, hopefully, about what their concerns are. And if after, attempting to address those concerns with those individuals directly, you would have the opportunity to address them up front with the Planning Commission, explain why those concerns are either unwarranted or can be mitigated or controlled through proactive steps that you're going to take with your operation. I think having a good idea of what you're going to come up against during that hearing is paramount when you go in front of the Planning Commission. You want to know that your project, number one, is going to get a recommendation of approval from staff. That is worth its weight in gold. If you can't get staff's recommendation for approval based on their evaluation of your application, you got a huge uphill battle and a very, very low chance of getting your project approved. So that's number one. Work very closely with staff. We have a great planning staff here in Calaveras County. I've had the pleasure of working with Madeline and a couple others in planning, and they're great, right? Very communicative, very diligent as far as getting the information that they need to draw up their staff reports and give a comprehensive presentation to the planning commissioners during those hearings. And to the extent that planning commissioners are willing to meet with applicants ahead of the hearing so that you can hear what their concerns are directly, and if you haven't addressed those at the time that you're able to meet with them, you go back, do some research, and figure out, how you're going to either rectify the situation that's causing those concerns or plan ahead to make sure that, you can avoid the negative aspects surrounding those concerns moving forward.
Sure. And especially, I think, if you're going to buy a piece of property with the idea in mind you're going to have commercial cannabis, talk to those neighbors first.
I think so. Absolutely. Yeah. Talk to the neighbors, get your environmental resources survey done. If you're not working with an architect or an engineer, at least try and, work with the draftsman, get those property boundaries, draw up your setbacks, you overlay. I mean, I'm giving some practical advice here.
Sure.
It's okay. Get your environmental resources survey, determine where those environmental constraints are going to be. And then, within those setbacks and within those environmental constraints, you can start planning your project out. And yeah, talk to those neighbors, before you go in and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on that property, especially if it's going to be a CUP, right?
Sure.
And not a ministerial permit. And that's the great thing about Calaveras County is that ministerial permit, they did a really good job up front with their environmental impact report and adopting some mitigation measures and a process that was going to reasonably assure that cannabis operations that are compliant with the county code were not going to cause a disturbance to the community. And certainly, there's cases where there's violations by permitted farms, but for the most part, the farms that have been able to get up and running and have a couple of 2-3 years under their belt, you don't see a lot of problems out of them, even with the market decline. So go ministerial if you can.
Sure, absolutely. I'm going to add one more. I'm going to
Sure.
say get a lawyer And I am going
Can't argue with that.
recommend that. I'm just going to let people know the reason you're on this show today is because I've been to every planning commission since 2012, every board meeting since 2012, and I have seen a lot of not so professional lawyers come through when it comes to cannabis. And you are the one of them, that you come in, you're prepared, you're knowledgeable, you're professional, and I have seen you stay very calm, collected in situations where I probably would have been throwing something at somebody.
Well, don't, you can. If you want to do it on my behalf, go ahead. No, I'm just kidding. I appreciate the compliment. Early on in 2016, this was new for everyone, right? The quote unquote standard for care for the profession hadn't been established yet. And so I was upfront with the people that I started working with in the beginning of, this is going to be a learning curve for everyone involved. But what I can assure you is that, I'm going to be diligent about knowing the parameters of what it is that we're venturing into, and establishing a trust and a loyalty to the end goal and the process, to where people can put their faith in you, put their investment in you, sometimes, put their life savings on the line in pursuit of going legit, of making that transition from, the nonprofit traditional side of the market over into the regulated space. It was a leap of faith for me as a career decision, and it was a big leap of faith for some of the pioneers in this industry that decided to get involved early on, and even now that are still deciding to get involved. Nothing was guaranteed. The time we started on this road, there were no local jurisdictions that were accommodating commercial cannabis businesses. And so the first step for us was, down in the valley, engaging in policy reform advocacy, working with local governments to get them to adopt regulations to give people an opportunity to do this legally. And so we've learned a lot, right? With every local jurisdiction, it has its own unique set of local regulations and rules to follow. We've been fortunate that, we've at this point, I think, had 40 plus new projects approved in 10 different local jurisdictions.
Nice.
Mostly between Stockton, Merced, Calaveras, and the East Bay. But we're still learning. Part of what we focus on in my office is continually looking on ways that we can improve the service that we provide our clients, on ways that we can become more efficient in what it is that we do. Time is, it's not a cliche, time is money. The longer your project takes to get approved, and the longer you're in the planning phase and not in the production phase and not in the sales phase, it's just money out the door. And so we understand that. And I think humility is huge with anything that you're involved with. I still won't call myself an expert. Certainly there were no experts in this in 2016. I'll say, I have probably more experience than 95% of the attorneys in California in this space. It's because I've dedicated my career and the efforts of my office exclusively to this, as far as Drivon Consulting, which is my cannabis law firm.
Okay.
So
I think you hit on a couple of really important points. One is every local jurisdiction is different.
correct.
So what you're doing in Calaveras County, you may not be able to do in San Joaquin County.
Correct.
So I think it's really important, if you consult an attorney, that you make sure they are versed in your local regulations. That's one. And the other point you made that I think is really relevant is that the landscape keeps changing. So this is still an area where there's not, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's a lot of case law even today that people can go back and look at. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, I mean, there's not like an established doctrine or any long history of case law. Case law is being established just in these last few years.
Exactly.
In civil court, I think, it takes an average of 2 or 2.5 years for a case to go to trial following a complaint. Most of all civil cases get settled. But yeah, that litigation, you're starting to see some of that come up. in different jurisdictions across California. And to the extent that, either the operator or the local government or partners have violated an agreement or an ordinance, that's the right that every, citizen and every business in California, at least when you're in good standing, has, is to take it to the courts and see where justice is going to prevail. And so, to your point, knowing those parameters, knowing those rules, being prudent and diligent about, drafting up your agreements and knowing exactly what you're in for in the beginning is huge. So you can avoid, no one wants to be in litigation. That's a waste of time and money. And so I've done my best to keep that's my background, right? It's keeping people out of trouble as much as I can, but avoiding, court. Now, when you got to go to court, when there is a grievance that is not going to be settleable between the parties, then, you have to take it there. But yeah, know what you're getting into. And do your research. It doesn't take an attorney for you to do, a quick Google search, cannabis regulations in X city or county. You're looking at property, pick up the phone, call the planning department, see what the zoning is, right? See if the type of cannabis business that you want to have is allowed in that zone and in that property. Find out what the sensitive use restrictions are, right? So we have setbacks from the adjacent property lines in Calaveras County, for instance. In other jurisdictions, your property lines have to be a certain distance away from, say, a youth facility or a church, just as an example, or a school, right? Not every local jurisdiction has those restrictions. Some have them, some don't. Some are more extensive than others. And so those are the types of things that can, blow you right out of the water before you even get started, is if, you land on the wrong spot, it's not zoned or set back appropriately for what you want to do. So, do a little bit of research up front. If you start getting serious and, you really feel that you're committed to getting a project up and running and you have the resources to do so, I definitely would agree. Contact someone that has the experience doing it.
And how do we contact you?
You can reach me. My office is in Stockton. You can reach us at 209-636-4856. You can email us, licensing@drivonconsulting.com. That's DRIVON consulting.com. You can email me direct, Zach, Z-A-C-H, at DRIVONconsulting.com. Look us up on the web, drivonconsulting.com. We're getting ready to relaunch all of our digital media and kind of do a refresh on what we have going on. So yeah, definitely excited to see what's coming down the pipe in 2025 with new projects, new clients, and helping our existing clients stay in the game and helping to protect and advance their interests moving forward.
All right. Is there anything we haven't talked about you think we ought to talk about today?
I think we covered some good ground.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, plan, have a very, very strong command of your operations, know who's doing what, who has what roles and responsibilities for your project, and, have your eye on the ball and make sure the ball doesn't get dropped, because it only takes once for it to railroad your entire operation. So I appreciate your time, Susan. Thanks for the opportunity to chat.
Oh, thank you for showing up today. I really appreciated talking to you too. And thank you to our listeners. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I hope you will enjoy us again in the future. There is a website if you'd like to go to it, www.calaverascannabis.farm, because we promote ecologically sound farming in Calaveras County.